From Interfaith Alliance, this is State of Belief Radio. I'm your host, Reverend Welton Gaddy. When Barack Obama delivered his inaugural address earlier this month, there was widespread consensus that he sounded more overtly progressive themes. Actually, a lot of people said downright liberal themes. Many also observed that he couched much of his rhetoric in overtly religious terms. Diana Butler Bass wrote in the Washington Post that the speech was nothing less than a public sermon, and she called it, quote, a masterwork of progressive theology. Now, here to talk about all of that is a real live theologian, Dr. Diana Butler Bass, and she's been on this show many times before, and I welcome her back to State of Belief Radio. Diana, welcome.
It's great to be here. I always love being on your show, Welton.
Good, thank you. In your article, you call the inaugural address, these are your words, a spiritual appeal to the new American pluralism. First of all, that is a whopping thing to call any initiative. And then secondly, what does it mean?
Well, when I talk about a spiritual appeal, I'm referencing the idea of civil religion,
right,
which is, of course, one of the major themes of the piece that I wrote in the Washington Post. So we can pursue that in a minute. I just want to get that question out of the way. And then when I talk about the new pluralism, one of the biggest changes in American religion in the last year, it happened between 2011 and 2012, is that the United States ceased being a country of diversity, where we had a majority of Protestants sort of as the solid center of American religious culture, and then a lot of diversity around that. But in that year, someplace between the end of 2011 and the beginning and the end of 2012, the United States lost its Protestant majority. And so right now, only 48% of Americans consider themselves Protestants. And that means that no single religious group in the United States any longer has 50% adherence in the population. And when nobody has 50% plus one, that means you go from being a diverse nation, which we've been for a long time, to a pluralistic one. And people who study religion had seen this coming for a long time. We just didn't know when it would really change. But it has, and it changed just as we were making the choice for a new president, and it certainly has changed. When politicians have to address the American people, they now have to take that in account, that nobody has 50%.
And to think about a pluralistic nation having some consensus about a civil religion is remarkable.
I have long wondered if it could be done. When you talk about civil religion in the United States, you're still addressing a majority of Christians. So if you add up Catholics and Protestants, you still come up to about 72% of the population. So there still is a large community of Christians, but those Christians are diversely spread through a multitude of denominations. But the real change is that other group of people. You have a huge number of folks who are none of the above, so they don't even want to be part of any religious tradition, which would include atheists and agnostics. But then you have the amazing growth of world religions. I mean, big Islamic community, very significant Hindu community in the United States, Buddhists, and a whole array of New Thought kinds of faiths, too. And of course, the Jews who have been here for a long time.
Okay, and so you also wrote that President Obama used a lot of religious language and religious ideas to bring people together, actually, in an increasingly diverse society. And you've mentioned atheists, because I was interested in asking you about this. Did some people actually said that they thought that the president's rhetoric and vocabulary did please progressive communities that have a religious orientation, but not necessarily atheists or humanists or people like that. What do you say about that?
That is the one piece of developing a new civil religion that is still very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
The reality of the numbers is that atheists are about 2.5%, maybe 3% of the population. And that's a big number. That's significant. That's more than the number of Americans who are Jews.
Mm-hmm.
So what they have to say and the way in which humanism addresses certainly progressive issues cannot be ignored. But that's the place I struggle, is that when you're thinking about civil religion, you're still thinking about religion. And so you're still thinking about transcendent appeals.
Right.
And so including atheists directly in that language is difficult.
It's difficult.
And I can see why they might feel excluded, even in a fine speech like this that really reached across religious boundaries. So that's a challenge for the future. And I would say that this speech pointed toward it, but didn't exactly accomplish that particular inclusion. But otherwise, I think it was amazing.
You're right. And that's a really good way to look at it. We had on the show last week an atheist who understands religious values and embraces the values but not the religion. And she was one that wouldn't even worry about whether it appealed to atheists or not, because she doesn't want atheism to be classified as a religion.
Oh.
But she was very much embracing what she heard values-wise. I want to get to some of the specifics, so we're not just talking about generalities.
Sure.
When you were listening to that speech or rereading it or whatever, what are some of the things that just jumped at you and made you say, gosh, I've got to write about this?
From the very first, when he talked about being on a journey and that the American journey was incomplete, I almost jumped out of my seat, because that, of course, is language that's a very strong language in African-American Christianity and also in liberal Protestantism. And I recognized it from both of those sources. And I thought, oh, my gosh, he's going for this. It's going to be a religious toned inaugural address. And after he opened with that theme of the journey, he used the word God a good number of times. I did not think he used actually the name of God so many times to be completely offensive to atheists. I think that's one place where he toned it down. But he did use all these belief statements. Yeah. And he kept saying, we believe, we believe, we believe, over and over. And I thought to myself, he's outlining a creed. And so it was literally while I was watching it and I was hearing these linguistic clues that I began to get very excited about it. So I was tweeting it and putting up some things on my Facebook page when one of the editors from the Washington Post, who follows me on Twitter, sent me an email and said, can you write about this for the Post?
Yeah,
and I said, oh no, now I'm in trouble. Because we went to the inaugural ball that night, and I had to get this done.
Oh my goodness.
So it was an interesting day, and I didn't realize that I was noticing something that was so theologically distinct that the Post wanted me to call it out and write a piece specifically about its theology.
One of the things that I wonder, and I have to ask you this. According to the journalist, the president used the word God more than anybody had used it in recent history. Used it more than George W. Bush did.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Now, why is it that we in the progressive community don't see any problem with that? When George Bush used the word God, we got all offended.
Oh, that's a good question. I think that the difference comes in the kind of civic speech that the two presidents created. Back in the 1960s and 1970s, when scholars of American religion began really exploring the category of civil religion, the two main articles were written by Robert Bella, who is now, I think he's still alive.
Yeah, I think he is.
He's getting pretty old. But he wrote the seminal article on civil religion. And then Martin Marty from the University of Chicago followed about probably 8 or so years later with a book called The Nation of Behaviors. And both of those, that book and the article, outline two forms of American civil religion. One form is called the priestly form, and that's the form of civil religion that blesses the way things are. And so you can ask God to bless the nation because you think that the nation is fundamentally good or fundamentally right, and that God then has displayed towards the nation all of these, sort of made us wealthy or made us just or whatever as a reward for our faithfulness. Right. And then the prophetic civil religion is a way of appealing to the divine that says, well, we want to get things right, but we haven't. And so we're calling on God to help us be more just, to be better people, to live our values, to walk our talk, to embrace God's intention for all humanity. And so one of the things that the Bella and Marty articles did back in the 60s and 70s is look at a lot of different public speech by very famous politicians. And they saw primarily Kennedy's inaugural address as an example of priestly public speech, and then Martin Luther King as an example of prophetic public speech. Now, when you asked me about George W. Bush and Obama, I think that that's exactly the difference, is that George W. Bush, when he talked about God, and I was never offended when he talked about God as a Christian person myself, but he was in the priestly tradition. And so his clear theological understanding of God and America was that God liked America as it was. And the only thing that America had to do was to be even better at what it was doing. Right. So, beating back the terrorists or, being thankful for the riches God has given us and sort of portraying American exceptionalism as light for the nations of the world. Right. That's all the priestly tradition, whereas Obama in this speech definitely appealed to the prophetic tradition. Right. Right. And so when progressives – you really kind of surprised me with your question, but I think that progressives might hear that difference, but not have any language to sort of explain what they're hearing. Yeah. And so they think, Bush was using God to sort of bless his policies, where Obama was really using theological insight to challenge the way things are and say that we could be better. Yeah. That we're sort of an incomplete nation, and that we're on this journey, and that we have to have this component of faith and trust to get there.
You've just given progressive people a good way to talk about that, if they want to talk about it, because that's an excellent answer. And actually, when I jotted down that question, I thought, I'm really glad she's not asking me that question. Oh, so I thank you for answering it. And if anybody listening is wondering, what does civil religion look like? I've got the perfect answer, because I remember watching a Liberty Bowl game probably a decade or so ago, and at halftime they had on the field on one 40-yard line a creche. On the other 40-yard line, Santa Claus and the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. The people in the stadium were singing Silent Night and waving American flags. Well, now there is a pretty good definition and image of civil religion, but that doesn't actually qualify as either the priestly or the prophetic.
No, it just qualifies as confused.
That's right.
And I actually wondered if you would ask me, you being a Baptist, if there was any point to civil religion at all. Because certainly Baptists in the United States have had a long history of criticizing civil religion.
But it plays a great role as long as you know it's a civil religion, not a revealed religion.
That's right.
That's the way I would say it.
Yeah. If you understand how it functions in American
wait a minute,
culture.
You're not supposed to be asking.
I'm sorry.
I guess the other thing I want to ask you, because we're going to run out of time way too quickly, but Do you see now, after the president has done this, do you see other politicians picking up on that and maybe going somewhere they haven't gone before with it?
Well, I would hope so.
Yeah.
I really do think that this speech opened the door for a new kind of civil discourse. And it is one that can appeal to pluralism, because even though the language was largely from President Obama's own African-American tradition and his liberal Protestant tradition, it is those languages appeal very broadly across religious traditions. And so the category of journeying is one that Catholics can easily understand, ones that I think it's a language that evangelicals can embrace. Mm-hmm. It's certainly a language that Buddhists get. So there's that the appeal to an image or a theme that invites Americans of a lot of different faiths into reflection about the meaning of the nation and how we can do better as people. If you can use religious language and spiritual language to do that, it empowers people in a certain kind of way to act. You
hinted at this, and we can't spend but a minute right here because we got to get out. But I thought that it was, among other things, an appeal to the people who actually made the difference in winning the election, which were, as you mentioned a while ago, the nuns, the people who consider themselves spiritual but not religiously affiliated. And that speech would have appealed to them and affirming their new kind of majority opinion within this diverse nation.
Yeah, the central part of the speech sets up, in a sense, a very inclusive creed that would appeal to the nuns. And I wrote it, we believe in community, we believe in shared prosperity, we believe in mutual care of one another, we believe in stewardship of the earth, we believe in peacemaking, and we believe in equality and human rights. Yeah. And that is really a creed for the Obama coalition. And it's both humanist and it is progressive, but it is also drawn from, as he did throughout the speech, there are all kinds of biblical and spiritual allusions underneath each one of those points.
That's right. And I agree. I agree with the principles. As a Baptist, I can't believe in a creed. So
I'm sorry.
I mean, if we can't believe in the Apostles' Creed, we can't believe in Obama's creed. So, Dr. Diana Butler Bass, thank you so much. She is a scholar, an educator, the author of 8 books, including Christianity After Religion, The End of Church, and the Birth of a New Spiritual Awakening. Her article headlined, "In Obama's Inauguration Speech, A New American Religion." It appeared in the Washington Post on January 25, and we'll link it from stateofbelief.com. So if you want to go and read it, go right there. Dinah, it's always fun. I wish that we had not programmed other parts today and we could have just gone on and on. But thank you for coming in and being with us again on State of Belief Radio.
Oh, you're welcome.